I'm actually half Chinese, half Canadian. Grew up in Hong Kong, UK, US. Traveled quite a bit, having mixed parents. And then now I'm settled in London for like 6 years I've been there. So I'm not a Londoner, but I'm starting to become one, yeah. I have a restaurant there, so it's a restaurant that's fairly new. It's been open 8 months now, and it's in central London. It's called Ikoyi. It's named after a borough of Lagos, Nigeria. And my old friend and business partner, we opened it together. It's a long plan of ours to open a restaurant, and the dream manifested itself through the lens of West African ingredients. So Ikoyi is a place, but we just use it as a point of origin for all of our inspiration. So we don't cook West African food, we cook our own food. We invent our own cuisine, and we use these ingredients as a starting point. So the three key things about the restaurant are we're explorers of these ingredients. So everything is approaching the ingredient with an open mind. We don't ring fence our creativity in tradition or authenticity. We have like interpretation for us means like limitless thinking of how we can use ingredients. So we'll take something like a fermented bush mango seed, which would be typically used in a stew in Nigerian home grandma cooking. Then we'll make a dessert with it, make a salted caramel and serve it with mangoes or something. So that's kind of the style of the cooking. And then the other aspects are flavor optimization. So we think about how we can optimize the inherent flavor of ingredients, like really question what is this ingredient, what is the best version of this ingredient, how can we optimize its inherent character, not just think like, oh, carrots, traditionally they're blanched and then glazed or whatever, or roasted. Why don't we do something different? Why don't we make a juice out of the carrots and then cook them in their own juice, concentrate the carrotiness of the carrot. So that's the second thing. It's a lot about cooking, the restaurant, and deliciousness. And then the third aspect is aesthetics. We work really hard to create aesthetics around our dishes that alienate our guests in a way, because the flavors for us, we're like alien explorers looking at these ingredients, so we like to reflect that objectivity and that sort of newness to amazing products in the aesthetics of the dishes. So they may look slightly, the inspiration will take from anything from the surface of the planet of Mars, which we'll try and apply to the texture of a plantain, to cyborg visions of Africa, and we'll put that into a dish. So yeah, that's kind of a really small summary of what we do, but there's a lot more to say, but just can't really summarize it. A lot of people think it's a Japanese restaurant because it sounds kind of Japanese, and that's kind of the reason why we liked it, because I'm mixed race, I'm part Asian, and I always have affinity to East Asian culture. And when my friend told me that he was born in Ikoyi, I was like, that sounds like somewhere in Japan. So part of the reason we picked the name was because of its cultural ambiguity. And our food is kind of culturally ambiguous. It really doesn't speak to like any one specific origin. It's challenging in a way for someone that's looking to identify or like geolocate a dish. So yeah, I think the philosophy about food stems from the desire for like family to be together and to eat together. So I think that's how I got into cooking, is having a disparate family spread across the globe. So cooking for me is like a way of imposing control on a family situation and forcing people to sit down. And by being a cook and actually being in charge of the meal and optimizing the meal, you optimize the family gathering by making people happy. So I think for me, the philosophy about cooking is largely based on this psychological aspect of reenacting family situations and making them as stable and as joyful and as happy as possible. So it's probably some kind of like deep personal fulfillment which is reenacted in my work. That's where it comes from. It doesn't come from a narrative of trying to recreate or retrace West African ingredients. That's just the lens or the portal through which we express cooking and hospitality. If I speak for myself, I don't cook my food with a view to please those who come from the regions from which I take their ingredients. For me, it's about open-mindedness and looking at the ingredients purely as they are and showing them great respect, which is, in a way, a different kind of authenticity. It's authentic to the ingredient. And I think if you profess to be authentic and then you do what I'm doing, then you get yourself into a lot of trouble. You know what I mean? We don't profess to be an African restaurant. We profess to cook with West African ingredients, but we're a London restaurant. But then restaurants that are visually, the aesthetics, their interior, their branding, everything, if that's geared towards a more authentic view of the target culture, then I think they're not doing justice. They become gimmicky, and I think that can be the problem. And you can get kind of swept into that, which was what we had a lot of problem with when we opened. We had a lot of Nigerians coming to our restaurant, extremely angry at what we were doing, because they thought we were, tearing apart their food, when actually we're fascinated with the ingredients, not the dishes themselves. I would never try and recreate home-style Nigerian cooking. I can't cook it because I don't particularly like it either, so I wouldn't choose to do that. I think it's great, but it's not for me. So for me, it's about the ingredients. But I think your question about London reflecting the immigrant kitchen faithfully, I don't think it does it faithfully now. And I don't think, well, I have to say that there are a few Thai restaurants. There are a few great Thai restaurants where the chefs aren't Thai, but they've done a lot of research and they have a lot of passion for Thai ingredients. And I think they do a good job of not recreating faithfully, but at least like attempting to do justice to the original Thai cooking. And they really cook like they're real cooks. It's not a gimmicky process for them. There's a few great ones in London. I'd say those are the ones that stand out. I think there's a lot of great Indian food in London too, but there's also quite a large Indian population, diaspora. It's mixed. It depends what you're going for, but there's definitely those that are jumping on the bandwagon of like inauthentic ethnic cuisine and not doing justice to the culture and just kind of doing playful takes on it just to take advantage of a gap in the market. I'd say my mum and dad are my biggest influences by far, mainly because my dad was so strict on keeping an open mind, and he had such a brutal palate. He's not a foodie, but he just hated everything. So as a kid, I grew up having this maniacal obsession with ingredients and questioning whether they were good or not because of what he was saying. And then traveling a lot, having mixed parents allowed me to eat everywhere. And I think that's what cooking is. It's not just learning to cook. That's one process, learning how to make a perfect sauce. But actually, if you want to be a chef and make your own dishes, you need to eat a lot of food, and you need to know, okay, you've had one great steak in one great steakhouse, but you need to eat hundreds of steaks all over the world, and as many places as you can, bad ones as well, loads of bad ones, loads of good ones, to figure out what means good to you, rather than going to Heston Blumenthal's restaurant and eating his steak, because really it might not be the best in the world. It might just be something that's his vision of the greatest steak, but really it's up to you. So I think my dad, in that respect, pushed me quite hard, and then my mum, just by being very encouraging and encouraging to creative pursuits. I think those are the two fundamental things to me. In terms of places I've worked, I was more of an anthropologist going into someone else's home and asking every single question possible about the processes, the ingredients, the sourcing techniques, and just wrote everything down. So it wasn't really a mentor-protege relationship. It was more of a go in, strip out as much information as possible and leave. There's a lot of different types of dried fruits, berries, peppercorns, chilies, bitter leaves, sour leaves, a lot of really, really pungent fermented pulses, fruits, breadfruit seeds, locust beans, things that you would find create enormous amounts of depth of flavor and umami. And that's central to what we do in our restaurant. We really think that no dish can exist without umami. You can have a sour dish, but you can't eat something that's 100% sour. Otherwise it just becomes too much. Sour, oh, it's great. And by the third bite, it's just sour. So we use a lot of sourness and we use a lot of bitterness and sweet and salty to counteract or enhance the umami. But for us, the umami is always like the driving force of every dish, even our desserts. Because if you think about it, something that causes salivation, and salivation is the first step to digestion. So when you're digesting and you're eating, you want to eat more. So if you create a dish based on building blocks of ingredients that are high in certain types of acids that create umami, then you almost, it's a kind of pragmatic approach to creating a dish, because you're creating a dish that's going to make people's mouths water regardless of whether they like it or not. So they want to eat more, even if they're unsure about it. So anyway, going back to the ingredients themselves, the West African ingredients are huge in umami, huge in spice, huge in aromatic, fragrant peppercorn. So we use a lot of these chilies, and we make a lot of infusions, we make a lot of oils, we make a lot of different types of condiments and ferments that we use as flavor building blocks for our dishes. I think some of the most interesting ones are this bush mango seed. It's called obono, the one I was telling you about from Nigeria. It's so pungent. It smells like cheese and burnt soap. It's like really, really intense. And we thought, like, what are we doing? Are we just using this ingredient for the sake of it because no one's using it and it's cool to put it on your menu? But then we played around with it and we realized in a very low concentration that sourness and that like cheesiness is actually really complex and to the human palate, you know, cheese complexity. So whey caramel is something a lot of chefs use. It's trendy caramel, using the whey proteins from cheese making, strained yogurt. They add that to caramel to make quite a sour caramel. So we use the obono seed, toasted and roasted, and make it into a paste and add that to a very light caramel. And what's interesting is the obono seed also has this enzyme that thickens, so it gives an elasticity to the caramel, which is really cool. So it's elastic and it has a draw to it, but it's also slightly sour, slightly fermented, complex. So if you have that and you add a lot of salt and you combine that with a very sweet dessert, you've got something really intriguing. So yeah, that gives you an example of what the kind of thing we do. And then people will come and they'll say, oh, is this a typical Nigerian dish? You know, they'll see that dish and be like, no, it's a figment of our imagination. It's just like, yeah. We found this supplier of wild, giant black tiger prawns. They're as long as your arm from here to here, over a foot long. Really expensive actually, and they're caught wild, flash frozen on a boat of a Belgian trawler, and they're sent to London. And we thought it would be cool to open with a dish like that, just to like open with a bit of a bang, and they're visually really striking. So that dish is like, so we make a bisque based off the idea of a bouillabaisse, except we use the shells from the prawn and half of the head, and we roast them in brown butter, the shells, for a long time, and then we add confit, ginger, shallots, lemongrass, big bunches of thyme and aromatics, and then we have a very, very rich mushroom and anchovy dashi, which is kombu, different types of dried mushrooms, dried anchovies, katsubushi, simmered at a very specific temperature and strain, and then added to the roasted shells once the pan has been deglazed with Pernod and white wine. So to give that classic French taste, we deglaze it and then we add the stock and then we simmer it, and then we add palm nut fruit, which is a Nigerian fruit. It's a very like sour, delicious flavor. And then what else do we add? A lot of different types of fragrant peppercorns as well. So it's like a very spicy, sour bouillabaisse with tremendous amounts of umami. We simmer it, and then we blitz the whole thing, bones, heads, everything, brains, to this thick, like bright orange stock. And then we squeeze it through a super bag. so it becomes very, very clear. And then we take a small amount and we make a roux, and we add it back to this stock, so it coats the back of a spoon. It's very very cool color and like Moorish texture. When you drink it, it tastes like cloves and Pernod and anise, and then really, really strong roasted prawn head flavor. You know, like the caramelized brains of a shrimp. And then we take the body, we poach it in spiced brown butter, just at a very low temperature. And then we take young cabbage leaves, which have been steamed and then grilled. And then we wrap that around the prawn, and then we grill it again. And then we serve it with some grits from Anson Mills, like yellow grits, which we cook very simply in a stock. And then we finish that with caramelized corn puree. So it's like a risotto. So the grits taste like caramelized fresh corn puree with the texture of grits. So you've got this massive prawn with this barbecued flavor coming from the leaf, and then the grits, which are really sweet, and then this glazed bisque, which is poured over the shrimp, and it glazes it and it gives it this really lovely depth. And then we serve it with half of its head, which we keep the head, all the brains and the meat inside the head, and then we rub it with a paste of black garlic and lemon thyme, and then grill the head and then brulee the brains. So you can scoop them out and you can mix them in with the grits, yeah. That's the dish, yeah. But we don't have it on the menu anymore because it's kind of a lot to put together, you know, at the end, yeah. Especially when we opened, we kind of wanted to like punch people in the face a bit and be like, why should we downplay spice and seasoning? Why don't we like blow people's faces apart a little bit and wake them up to like just everyone doing the same thing? You know, let's do something and let's do it a little bit over the top. And I think it was a bit over the top at times, like it's a bit too spicy at times, but then we've kind of toned it down a bit. I learned systematic, brutal forms of organization and self-discipline, and learning how to move really fast and get tremendous amounts of work done in a very short period of time. How to be organized, how to be clean, how to make things happen when you're really, really in trouble. Those are the things, like the sense of fear of like, oh my gosh, like I'm cooking lunch for so many people today, and the tasks and the work and the level of detail involved working at those kinds of restaurants is so labor intensive. There's no time for coffees and chit-chatting. It's like you're pushing on, or you're fired, or you just give up and run away. So there are a few days where I had it working at these places where I thought, I've literally got so much to do. I'm so overwhelmed, I don't know where to start. Am I just going to not do this and just run away? Sometimes I thought I was just going to run out the door because I just had too many things to do. And then you just kind of take a deep breath and you're kind of panicking, and you've got 5 blenders going on at the same time, and your foot is like on the hob and your right hand is in a pan, and you're just, you know what I mean? It's just like, I think learning to kind of deal with like that kind of pressure is really, really valuable for cooking, because then you know when it does come to you and it's your own business, you're not surprised by it. And it definitely hardens you a lot, hardens your skin, and it sets a standard for working. It's inspiring. It's like, so I do miss that environment of like questioning, like, is this really good enough? Like, and if we can do it to this standard, why should we like lower our standard the next time, you know? So if collectively as a team, if we all see that this is how a carrot should be peeled perfectly, and the next day someone doesn't do it quite as well, you ask them, well, why are you doing it like that? We know how it's supposed to be done. I know it sounds a little bit culty and extreme, but it's just this idea, and I guess it kind of inspired me about thinking about life and like, well, if I'm going to do it, why not just do it properly? And if I know how to do it properly. So I think those kind of kitchens instill that in you very, very hard, which, you know, other restaurants don't necessarily. I'm not saying that that's for everyone or that's important, but for me it's been good. I'm not saying that's like the best way, it's just I personally like that way. I realise if you don't want to be a chain, have 10 restaurants that do pretty well, you want to be a singular restaurant that does extremely well financially. You kind of have to be great, you have to stand out. You have to stand out amongst a sea of mediocrity to survive. So it's this idea of greatness as a survival mechanism, which I try and like think about is like not just to be great because I love cooking, which I do, but I think if the climate wasn't so competitive and it wasn't so sort of your survival, it wasn't based on like how busy you were as much as it is now, I'd probably be a bit more chilled and like try things out a bit more and like not worry about how many. So now I've got this idea in my head that if you're a progressive like restaurant, you have to reinvent. You have to like push out new ideas, and we're a small restaurant with quite a small menu, and we really try and like think things over and think how we can do something really original, really inspiring. And so we try and change every 2 months or so and do a real overhaul. And we're currently in the process of doing it again. And I've noticed that it makes a difference. It gives everyone this electric shock and reminder that they need to come back, and that they know that there's more like interesting things to come. It's a completely meritocratic kitchen. It's just like there's not a power structure that's like, can you do it? Are you willing to do it? If you can do it, do it. The sky's the limit. If you would like to contribute and you want to do something, the door is always open. Everyone does everything. No one is too good to do anything or too junior to have a say. It's a complete meritocracy. And in terms of creative input, it's been something I've been working on a lot, which is building the trust in the individuals first, and just first identifying that they have the working standards and method in place of how we do things, like what's the correct way to do things, and to see that they take initiative in that. I have to see that first before I can say come up with a new dish, because if they don't really know how to run themselves or run their section or run, or even cook to the right standard, it's not really fair to give them the opportunity to contribute. But now they're all amazing. I've got the same team from when I opened, and while I'm away here for this week, I've actually given my sous chef, I've handed him a brief with every single new dish that I want to put on the menu, and the brief is extremely detailed: texture, ingredients, vision, aesthetics for every single dish. But then I said, you're going to divide the team up into groups, and you guys are going to actually engineer each of these dishes based on this brief, and then we're going to have a tasting on the 25th of April. So it's a first test to see whether the engineering of a concept can actually take place without my presence. And if that is a success, then we can slowly move on to people coming up with the concept themselves rather than just engineering the concept, which is difficult in itself, but actually like extracting something from their soul and saying this is a dish, that's a completely different exercise to taking a brief which is like mackerel, tiger nuts, strawberries with this texture, this texture, this texture. That's just like a draftsman who can repaint a really, really nice painting or the idea of a painting. But the other aspect of it, which is to come up with the idea for the painting itself, is much trickier. Mm-hmm. But I want them to get to that level. I went to Australia really recently on a break, like a proper break, but I think it took me a while to be able to do a trip like that. And I think as a new business, and this is an opportunity to actually be my own boss, and you can't really afford to like screw it up the first one. For me, I really wanted to make sure it was running to the level I wanted it to run before I could step out and turn off my phone for 2 weeks. So I've only just been able to do that after 2 years. So I guess now that I've got an amazing team and they get it, they're in the zone, I'm going to try and step back from time to time and go on trips like this and share the knowledge of what we're trying to do and build the brand and extend the message of the restaurant and what we're trying to achieve. Keep an open mind and try and figure out what your passion is, like what you're really passionate about. And then once you figure it out, keep your head down and stay disciplined and quietly work towards it, and don't listen to anyone. If you know what it is, you don't quite know how to get there, but you know that like the hard times are worth it. I think you just keep your head down and keep pushing, and then the hard work will pay off. If you know roughly what the end goal is, I guess you have to think like, what do you want from life? Like, what kind of lifestyle do you want when you're older? Like, what do you want to achieve? You don't have to think so concretely about how you're going to get there. I just think you need to think like, where do you see, where do you see your future? And then I think that for me, I had no idea I was going to open a West African restaurant, but I knew that I wanted to express myself very strongly through cooking. So I just put my head down and just soaked up information, and then the opportunity came. So I'd say, like, if you have real passion and real desire to do it, then just stay focused and don't let anyone tell you otherwise, and go for that.